Lunch and Learn in PED. Our first Lunch and Learn is about the city incentive programs that will be presented by the team from the Economic Development Division. A few notes before we get started. We have a lot of participants, so in order to make sure the sound is very clear, we ask that you please mute your mics. And as people pop in, I'll be also muting the mics just so that we can hear the presenters really clearly. A second point of note is that this meeting will be recorded. It'll be recorded for future use as well as for new staff onboarding. And also at the end of the session, we're going to be holding a question and answer period. So if you have any questions, I ask that you go into the chat feature, which is on the screen. If you see the little speech bubble and you click on it, and you send a message to everyone, if you want to type your question in there, at the end of the session, we will do our best to try and address the questions that way. And so please mute your mics. And I'm going to pass it over to Judy Lamb, who's our manager of commercial districts and small business, to talk a little bit more and to introduce the team.
Thanks, Judy. Sylvia. Thanks. Just as a start, you're wondering, some people might say, who's commercial districts and small business? And in January of this year, we were renamed that. We were formerly the Urban Renewal section of economic development. And the idea of why we did that was to reflect the opportunities and assistance that we currently offer to our local business districts. Mm-hmm. Which help create vibrant downtowns and commercial districts for living, working, and playing. And so as part of this minor restructuring, we did incorporate the Hampton Business Center, which HBC was formerly known as the Small Business Enterprise Center on the first floor of City Hall. And so this change helps us focus on small business and entrepreneurship, complementing the role of revitalization in our downtowns, commercial districts, and BIAs. And so, good afternoon. I'm glad you could join for this first virtual PED Lunch and Learn on financial incentives. And, some people might wonder why we should offer incentives. And I feel our incentives have played a great part. We have facade grants that make the commercial areas more attractive. They feel clean and safe for our patrons. We have been able to create and renovate apartments and condos for extra residential units in our downtowns and other areas. And we've been able to create employment and new companies moving into our core. As well, we've been able to preserve our heritage buildings, remediate contaminated lands through our brownfields programs, and that protects our environment and protects scarce resources. And finally, we have promoted art through our art murals, through our BIA facade grants, as well as asking developers to donate 10% of the development charges that they have to pay to our downtown public art program. So I do want to thank a lot of staff that participate in our center programs because we couldn't do it alone. We have municipal law who helps us check property standards, building codes, fires department checks with fire code. We have our building department that the inspectors go out and inspect for our properties, zoning verifications, and real estate peer reviewing our appraisals. We have the planning department that participates in our project reviews. And we couldn't do without our corporate services, taxation finance that estimates all our pre and post-development taxes and assessments, C&G for helping us with all our maps, and our legal staff that make sure that our documents are in order. And Lisa and Carla will go through that later in detail when we go through some of our due diligence. So what I'm going to do right now is share my screen so I can get my PowerPoint loaded, and I will introduce our team, our experts. So we have Phil Caldwell, who is our Senior Project Manager, Carlo Gorney, Coordinator of Incentives, Kristen Hugenboss, coordinator of the Hamilton Business Center, and Lisa Browett, business analyst for incentives. So now I'll turn it over to Phil to give it a start. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I just have 2 slides at the very beginning here, just to kind of set the framework for how it is that we offer incentive programs in the first place in terms of the legislation that municipalities operate under. Judy, go on to the next slide. So in Ontario, a municipality can only offer financial incentives to private landowners or for-profit landowners if the municipality has first created a CIP, or what's an acronym for Community Improvement Plan. CIPs are essentially policy documents that are authorized under the Planning Act and are intended to establish a few things right at the outset. First is the intent, rationale, and most importantly, what the desired outcome of providing the incentive is. What's the benefit going to be to the city? The CIP then goes into how this intent or the outcome aligns with not only the city's own policies, but also provincial policies. And it also establishes the geographic boundary within which an incentive is to be offered. That boundary can be an entire municipality, or it can be a subset of the municipality in terms of a certain community or a certain street. And then CIP also provides the detailed eligibility criteria and administrative procedures. That's the bones of the programs in terms of how we will determine someone's eligibility and how we will, as a municipality, administer those programs so that everyone is treated fairly and equitably. CIPs, when they're created, because they're under the Planning Act and because they are public focus, do have requirements that are similar to other types of planning documents. So when creating a CIP or amending a CIP, a public meeting is required. You also have to undertake advertisements in the newspaper. And it can also be appealed, similar to other planning matters, to the LPAT, the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. So in many ways, these CIPs operate and are treated by Ontario legislation similar to an official plan amendment, with some nuanced differences. So overall in Hamilton, we have 4 CIPs that are enabling 20 incentive programs. 3 of those CIPs are administered through economic developments. The 4th one is a new one created last year called Housing for Hamilton that is actually administered by the Housing Division. As a municipality, we undertake a comprehensive review of each of those CIPs every 5 years. And interestingly enough, our CIPs are some of the earliest. So the Downtown and Community Renewal CIP is that offers the majority of the programs that Carlo and Lisa will speak to, is actually in its earliest form from the late 90s, trying to resurrect the downtown. And the brownfield programs that we operate were actually Canada's first through a brownfield CIP that the city introduced in 2001. The current area, the current areas of focus for the CIPs in general are brownfield remediation and redevelopment. We have various geographic specific redevelopment and revitalization. So BIAs is a good example of that. Within those BIAs and other CIP areas, we address facade repair and improvements. We promote multi-residential developments with these incentives. There are programs that focus on LEED certification and covering incremental construction costs, which I'll talk about a little later. Heritage rehabilitation and reuse, as well as one of the more newer aspects is mixed income and mixed tenure housing, also known as affordable. So with that, I'll be back later about ERASE, but I'm going to hand it over to Lisa and Carlo to talk about the programs in more detail.
Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Hi, so this chart shows the number of applications that have been processed by staff between 2011 and 2019. And you'll notice there that the number of applications have doubled in that time frame. Next slide, please, Judy. This chart, it's a busy chart, but it shows the applications received by program over that same time frame. As you can see, we offer a wide range of financial incentives. There are facade programs, heritage programs, residential loan programs, a program for office leasehold improvements, a range of programs for the Barton-Kenilworth area, and remediation programs. So we want to speak to you about each of those programs, all begin with the residential loan programs. Next slide, please, Judy. So we have two residential loan programs, the Hamilton Downtown, Barton Kenilworth Multi-Residential Property Investment Program, which I'll just call the Multi-Res Program, and the Commercial Corridor Housing Loan and Grant Program, which I'll call the Commercial Corridor Program. When the residential program began in 2001, it concentrated generally on larger multi-residential developments within the downtown. Then, as now, we needed people living downtown to support the commercial entities to meet our density targets. So this program was developed early on to try to encourage property owners to invest in their properties and get people living downtown. To reach our density targets through the city, though, we need increased density through the transportation corridors and other areas of the city as well. So in 2007, we brought out the Commercial Corridor Housing Loan and Grant Program, which is available to a larger geographic area. And although mainly directed to smaller developments, it can be utilized by the larger developments as well. So there are some commonalities between the two programs. Both are loans that offer a maximum term of 5 years and 6 months. We advance the funds when the project is at 60%, 80%, and 100% complete. So the developer is putting in a substantial amount of their own funds before the city funds will flow. One of the most attractive features of these loans is that for 5 years, the loans are interest-free, and principal payments too won't commence until 1 year after the final advance at 100% complete. These loans can be used for residential condo developments or for rentals. They can be used for the creation of new units or renovation of existing units. Next slide, please. So this slide is speaking about the multi-res program, so more specifics about it. It first began and was used for the creation of new or renovation of existing residential dwelling units. Several years ago, though, when there was a need for some hotels to support tourism and conventions, the multi-res program was amended so that it could be used for all suites hotels. That option has since ended, but it did serve its purpose. And then in 2016, the program was amended such that it could be utilized within the commercial corridors along Barton and Kenilworth, which includes the Barton Village Business Improvement Area. The loan amount for this program is based upon 25% of the cost of construction to a maximum of $4 million per development. We have capped the maximum amount that can be loaned out to any one developer at any one time at $10 million. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is an example of a building that utilized the loan recently. It's the Acclamation. You may have recognized it if you go down James Street North. This is a condo development with 71 residential dwelling units. And we have a chart down at the bottom there that of the photo, and you can see there that since 2001, there have been 21 projects that have utilized this funding, and that has resulted in the creation of 1,484 dwelling units. The city borrows funds so that we can offer these loans. So for each dollar that our section has incurred on interest to offer this program, there has been $47 in construction value realized from the investment in those buildings. Next slide, please. This is more specifics about the Commercial Corridor Housing Loan and Grant Program. You may recall I mentioned the multi-res was offered in downtown Hamilton and the Barton Kenilworth areas. You can see by this slide that the Commercial Corridor is offered in those locations as well as many more. It's offered in the Mount Hope Airport Gateway. It's available to properties within all of our BIAs and commercial corridors within our community improvement project area and our community downtowns. It's also available to heritage designated properties. Now the loan amount, where the multi-res was 25% of the cost of construction, the loan amount for this program is $20,000 per dwelling unit. to a maximum of $600,000. However, this program also offers a grant for reimbursement of professional fees of up to $5,000. It can be used for large residential multi-res developments or small developments like duplexes and triplexes, or even smaller mixed-use buildings like the ones you see along Main and King commercial corridors with commercial ground floor units and 1 or 2 residential units above. So this program can be used to renovate those residential units above the commercial ground floor. So there is a great deal of flexibility with this program. Next slide, please. And this is an example of a mixed-use building that utilized the program. In this case, there is commercial on the ground floor and 10 residential units above. These residential units were vacant at the time of application. Actually, the building had sustained a fire on the upper floor. With the help of our commercial corridor program, the owners renovated the residential units. In this case, they also used our facade grants as well to clean up the exterior of the building. So now it's a much more attractive and safer building than it was just a few short years ago. Below the photo, you can see some more stats related to the commercial corridor program. This program has resulted in the creation or renovation of 109 residential units. And for each dollar in interest and grant payments that we have incurred, there has been $80 in construction value realized by those investments. So I was mentioning to Judy and the others yesterday, when we receive these loan applications, we visit the buildings that are going to be renovated. Oftentimes there's graffiti on the walls and broken glass on the floors, broken windows, and peeling paint and watermarks. But then you return to the building upon completion and the spaces have been transformed. They are clean, the plumbing and electrical have been brought up to code, new HVAC has been installed, there are new countertops, sinks, and toilets. So the city is putting money into these projects. The owners are putting money in as well, investing in their buildings, making their buildings more appealing and safer places to live and to work. Carlo will now speak about the other financial incentives helping us to transform the city. Next slide, please, Judy.
Oh, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to quickly run through a number of the programs that I'm responsible for administering within our section. So the first one is the Office Tenancy Assistance Program. It's a program that is used to hopefully attract new commercial tenants to the city. It's an interest-free loan to a maximum of $450,000. And the amount or the length of the loan runs in tandem with the time of the lease up to a maximum of 5 years. In order to be eligible, if they're moving into the city, they would have to lease at least 1,000 square feet. And if they're moving from within the city, they would have to increase their leasable square footage by at least 1,000 square feet. So one example of a building that recently was successful in applying to this program is, as you probably recognize, is the former Westinghouse building at 286 Sanford Avenue North. Next slide, please. So one of our 2 tax increment grant programs that we offer here is our Hamilton Tax Increment Grant Program. And in a nutshell, what that program offers successful applicants is a grant that reflects the increase in taxes that results from redevelopment or renovation of a property within the eligible areas. So for example, what we would do is we would look at their post-construction versus their pre-construction municipal taxes, not the education portion, just the municipal portion. And they could be eligible to receive up to 100% of that increase as a grant in the first year after the property is reassessed. And then that amount of the grant decreases each year on a sliding scale, as indicated in the slide there. So that while always remembering that the applicant has to pay their taxes every year, because of the grants that they're receiving back for the first 5 years, they're in essence not paying the full municipal tax bill until the 6th year after the property has been reassessed. Next slide, please. So there's just an example of one successful applicant to the program, 3139 King William Street in downtown Hamilton, which was just another nice addition to that role of buildings on the street. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about a number of programs that we offer within the Barton Street BIA and commercial corridors, as well as on the Kenilworth North commercial corridors. You have the exact boundaries listed there on the slide. So this commercial corridor building improvement grant program, it's a matching grant up to a maximum of $50,000 per deeded property. It can be used both on the inside and on the outside of the building for improvement. So for example, what I've seen since taking on this position, external repairs could include a new roof on the building, but at the same time, it could also include some bigger ticket internal items such as new HVAC, plumbing, or electrical. Again, all towards improving the buildings and making them more usable for future tenants. Next slide, please. Here's an example of an applicant who was successful in applying to the program and receiving funding at 657 Barton Street East. That's the former Henry Shoe building. So under that program, they used it for a number of things, new kitchens, windows, I believe, just general new flooring construction inside. So it was put to quite good use. Next slide, please. So there's another tax increment grant program that is specific to the Barton Kenilworth area. The principles are the same in terms of it is a grant provided to the applicant that reflects the increase in property taxes at that particular property because of the redevelopment. The difference here with this one is that it is a 9-year program. So eligible applicants could receive up to 100% of the increase in taxes that results from their work back to them for the first 5 years after the property has been reassessed, and then it decreases on a sliding scale as indicated there. Next slide, please. So there's an example, of a successful applicant to this program. That's 301, 303 Barton Street East within the boundaries of the Barton Village BIA. And what resulted from that was 4 renovated residential units along with 2 commercial units on the ground floor. Next slide, please. So the last program within this Barton Kenilworth suite of programs is a rebate of application fees programs. There are the boundaries on the slide where it can be realized. And really what this program does is it allows for applicants or developers within the boundaries to receive rebates on any or a number of municipal fees that they might have incurred over the course of their work. So for example, building permit fees are rebated upon final inspection and building permit completion as well. Okay, next slide. So now I'm going to talk about 2 of what could be referred to as our facade programs. So the first one is the Business Improvement Area, or BIA, Commercial Property Improvement Grant Program. It's offered only in our 13 business improvement areas throughout the city. And the amount of the maximum grant is largely based on the front footage of the properties. So as indicated in the first bullet there, for properties that have a frontage greater than 25 feet, it could be a maximum grant up to $20,000 or $25,000 if it's a corner property. If the frontage is less than 25 feet, the matching grant is a maximum of $10,000 or $12,500 for a corner property. In terms of what this program can be used for, it's really anything that would be an improvement to the facades of the building. So things such as new signage, lighting, windows, doors, improvements to the brickwork. Again, anything to improve essentially the look of the building. Now, within that BIA program, there's also a separate arts component, which is over and above what I've just described. So there's a maximum matching grant up to $10,000 that can be used for, as indicated there, artfully designed facade improvements or art pieces on private property. So for the most part, what it has been used for in the past are some of the great murals that you've seen within the various BIA areas throughout the city. Next slide. So here's a couple examples of some properties that have taken advantage of that program. So the one on the left at 178, 182 Lock South, they use the grant to install the new storefront that you see across the face of the building. And then the example on the right at 555 Concession Street, when the Cancer Assistance Program moved down the street into this building, they used the grant for new signage to indicate their move and their presence on the street. Next slide, please. So a smaller version of that program is our Commercial Property Improvement Grant Program. It's offered in CIPs, but not within BIAs, along with the Mount Hope Airport Gateway. Now the program, the principles of the program are essentially the same as they are for the BIA CPIG program, in that they're used for improvements to the front facade of the building or the street-facing side if it's a corner. A little less lucrative. The matching grant is a maximum of $10,000 or $12,500 if it's a corner property. Next slide. So here's an example of one such property that applied under that program. So this is the former Connaught Fish and Chips program building at 976 Main Street East at the corner of Gage. And they used funding from this program to refurbish the existing mural and add on to it as well. Next slide, please. So I'm going to now talk about our heritage programs that we do offer. So the first one is the Hamilton Heritage Property Grant Program. In order to be eligible, the property has to be designated under Part 4, Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. It has to be located as indicated on the screen there. So within downtown Hamilton, one of our community downtowns, like for example in Waterdown or Lancaster, within a BIA, or if not in one of those areas, it has to be located in the lower city between Highway 403 and the Red Hill and used for commercial, institutional, or multi-residential purposes. The maximum grant's $150,000 for eligible items. There is a formula used to calculate that. And then there also could be an additional $20,000 grant for heritage assessments and reports that may be required. A couple of examples of buildings that have taken advantage of this program. So this is, I believe it's 25 Mill Street in Waterdown. So what they used for this program is they refurbished 18 existing single hung windows, and they also designed 18 storm windows, and then they replicated, they created a new door to replicate the original door. And then on the right at 171 Forest Avenue, it's a single family home in the Corktown area of Hamilton, and they replaced a number of the windows on the property using that program. Next slide, please. Hamilton Heritage Conservation Grant Program. Again, properties have to be designated under the Act as indicated. And essentially what this program is for designated properties that are not eligible for funding under the previous program. And it offers matching grants of between $1,000 and $5,000 for the conservation of cultural heritage resources on the property. Next slide. So this is 493 Dundas Street East in Waterdown, and the owner of this property took advantage of the program to refurbish and clean up the brickwork on various facades of the house, including repointing a lot of the grout and the mortar. Next slide. And then lastly, amongst our heritage programs, there is a heritage loan program. Yes, loan program. It's a 0% interest loan up to a maximum of $50,000. As with the other two, the property has to be designated under Part 4, Part 5 of the Heritage Act within the city. And next slide. So here's an example of a successful applicant at 3133 Melville Street in Dundas. And they used this loan program to restore and refurbish the two front windows, and then they also designed two interior storm windows for the property as well. Next slide. So I'm going to quickly run through what the processing of the application is for, and it really speaks to one of the points Judy had made earlier in terms of all of the different departments that really play a big role and help us out in processing these applications. So once we receive the application with the fee, we do require that they provide us with 2 estimates for each of the types of work that they're seeking funding for. The application is sent over to Legal Services, who checks title for us and ensures that none of the parties involved in the application are in any kind of litigation with the city. We check to make sure there's no outstanding fire code, property standards, or building code violations. All property taxes have to be paid on the property. And we also carry out a zoning verification to confirm just that the current proposed uses are both permitted and recognized by the city. Building division has a look at it, so they'll let us know if the estimates are in line with industry standards and whether or not various permits, including a building permit, are required by the applicant. And if applicable, we'll also send it off to one of the two cultural heritage planners for their review and comments as well. So assuming all's good, there's an internal staff process that would see our general manager approve the application. At that point, the applicant would receive a letter of understanding for their review and signature. So that's essentially the contract between the applicant and the city as to the work to be carried out. Next slide, please. Now, when the work's completed, the applicant informs us in writing that that's taken place. They provide us with final invoices showing the work completed and fully paid for. We do all that due diligence again, except not the legal and the zoning. So again, we'll check to make sure that taxes are paid, there's no building code, fire code, or property standards violations. And assuming that's the case, it's all good. It's just hopefully a short process where a check requisition takes place, which will lead to payment of the grant. Okay, so thank you very much, and I'll hand it back over to Lisa.
Thanks, Carlo. So here we're looking at the processing of the loans. So all of the due diligence that Carlo spoke about that's conducted at the beginning of the process for the grant programs, that same due diligence is conducted for the loan programs, but there are additional steps that we take as well. We do credit checks, bankruptcy checks, we do Google searches on the applicants. Our in-house real estate appraisers will review the appraisal documents that were submitted with the application. For the multi-res projects, we assemble 2 evaluation teams for the multi-res program, a planning evaluation team, as well as a financial evaluation team. The planning evaluation team will evaluate the project against various criteria. They're going to look at the land use, they'll look at parking requirements, the built form, the urban design, the number of stories, as well as the heritage aspects of the building. The financial evaluation team will review and evaluate the budget documents that have been submitted, the net worth statements, the pro formas, and financial statements. If everything is in order, a report will be prepared for council. For the commercial corridor program, if the loan and grant are less than $200,000, the general manager of planning and economic development can approve the request. For amounts that are $200,000 or more, they require council approval as well. Then following approval, loan documents would be prepared by our legal staff. Next slide, please. The processing of the loan advances, this is similar to the payment of the grant for the first part. The loans are advanced at various stages of completion, depending on the program terms. I had mentioned before, 60, 80, and 100% complete for the residential loan programs. So the first part of that due diligence on payment, as mentioned, is similar to what Carlo had mentioned for the grants, but then we have additional due diligence as well. We have site visits, we have documentation review. If the loan amount for the multi-res is over $1 million, then there's a report from a quantity surveyor. So that gets reviewed in detail. And there are the site visits as mentioned, and we check to ensure that the equity requirements have been met throughout the whole process. And there'll be title checks as well to ensure that there are no liens that have been registered on title. And then if everything is in order, the advance would be completed. So now Phil will speak about our erase programs. Sorry, the CIP review, pardon me.
Hi again. So just to close off the programs that Lisa and Carlo talked about, as I mentioned at the outset, our CIPs undergo 5-year reviews. The CIP that authorizes the programs you just heard about is the Downtown Community Renewal CIP. It was last updated in 2015, and so this year we're going to be starting the review of that document. The intent is to make sure that it's actually achieving the goals that it's intended to, and also to check in with council and city departments and staff to ensure that the programs are meeting the intent and that there aren't any new priorities that might need to be addressed through these programs going forward. It's a chance to look at boundaries look at programs offered, introduce programs, reduce programs, or remove programs to address the city's needs. So that's something we're initiating this year. We've already started a bit of work on it, although it's been interrupted a little bit. But our intention really is to get to council in Q1 2021 with those amendments to the CIP. So this review, like I said, is going to include a lot of meetings with internal stakeholders, so various departments that we want to meet with to see how things are going, where there might be new priorities emerging. We'll be doing public meetings outside of City Hall, and we're going to also do focused consultation with past applicants. They're sometimes the best people to provide us with insight into how their experience was going through the process, and if there's any administrative or technical processes we could amend or update as well. And also on that point, I should also just mention that although we do reviews every 5 years, that's not to say there aren't amendments that occur intermittently through in between that time. So as a really good example, last year we got a motion from council to look at what's referred to as renovictions and whether our incentive programs were by any chance helping to result in renovictions of vulnerable tenants in buildings. So we got that motion and we brought back amendments to our programs to try and address that as best we could. So that's an example where there may be things that come up or arise that we try and address outside of these comprehensive reviews. So I'm going to talk about just very quickly in the interest of time, I'm going to fly through some information on our erase programs, which are the ones that deal with providing grants and incentives to help with the remediation of properties within the city. So this is the project area within which incentives for erase apply. It's the urban boundary that's same for planning purposes. The reason why it's such a broad boundary is, Hamilton has a strong industrial history. So there's a lot of industrial sites, old industrial sites that are contaminated in the lower city. But that's not to say that anywhere else in the city there aren't other sites such as dry cleaners, which are notoriously troublesome for contamination, as well as old gas stations, so which are notorious as well. So throughout the city, we allow for a wide catchment of sites that could potentially access these programs in order to help with environmental remediation on the properties. So these are the programs that exist under the Erase CIP. I'm going to cover just the ones that are highlighted in the orange box there. There's 3 programs. The Environmental Study Grant Program, which was introduced in 2001, one of the original. There's the Erase Redevelopment Grant Program, again introduced in 2001. It has a spin-off option, if you will, for applicants called the DC Reduction Option, which I'll touch on briefly. And then our most recent program was introduced in 2010. It's the Downtown Hamilton West Harborfront Remediation Loan Program, which I'll cover as well. So firstly, the Erase Study Grant Program. It provides a matching grant for eligible studies. They're meant to help along with the investigation of sites so that people are more aware of the extent of contamination on a site. So a phase 2 environmental site assessment involves the drilling of boreholes to investigate where the contamination is, what the extent of the contamination is. So that's a study that we will provide funding towards. Phase 3 ESA, remedial action plans, risk assessments. Again, further documents and studies required as you go through a record of site condition process with the Ministry of Environment. In 2018, there was an update through a comprehensive review of Erase that allowed some additional studies to be contemplated under the program. One is a designated substances and hazardous materials survey, as well as an office feasibility study. So those 2 studies are applying certain geographic areas where they can be eligible, which include the older industrial area, current or closed institutional buildings, as well as designated heritage buildings to help along those sites, which might need a little more help to retrofit. The maximum grant that can be provided under the program is 50% of the cost of the study to a maximum of $20,000 per site. We allow a maximum of 2 applications under this program per site or development, and the combined value of the grants cannot exceed $35,000. And this is a staff level approval that we do within our section. The Erase Redevelopment Grant is a tax increment-based program similar to one that Carlo talked about earlier, whereby the increase in the municipal taxes that are realized from remediation and redevelopment of the site form the basis for the grant that is ultimately provided. So the potential grant amount is based, in this case, on the total eligible remediation costs that are going to be incurred to clean up the site to accommodate the new development. The grant provides 80% of the tax increment realized and will provide that for a period of 10 annual payments or until such time as their eligible remediation costs have been recovered, and it's whichever comes first. And in order to be eligible under this program, a site must obtain a record of site condition or an RSC from the ministry, or where one is not required by the ministry, we will contemplate a peer-reviewed risk assessment in place of that. This program requires council approval, so we write a recommendation report to council, and we typically take those reports forward once a development has received either a conditional or full site plan approval. This program requires us to work collaboratively with our finance and legal colleagues. Finance helps us with developing post-development tax assessments and estimates, and our legal staff help us to enter into the legal agreements that are required for applicants who are approved through the program. And just to give you an idea of some of the eligible program costs, so we do environmental remediation, not including construction costs, however. Other environmental studies that weren't already covered by the Erase Study Grant program. And again, in those certain areas, West Harbourfront and the older industrial area, which is actually more the older industrial is really the Bayfront area, as well as some of industrial lands around Fridge Street and the McMaster Innovation Park. So in those areas, we will contemplate costs associated with removal and abatements of designated substances and hazardous materials like asbestos, and demolition costs. And in all of the CIP area, we also do 50% of the cost of doing LEED certification. So these are just a couple examples of how the numbers work under this program. So if you took example one as an example, there's an eligible remediation cost of $1 million. The development and the remediation, once complete, will result in a tax increase to the city of $240,000. We will provide 80% of that back. So in this case, $200,000. And if you do the math between 200,000 and $1 million, that means that they'll get their remediation costs back within 5 years. In example two, we just bump up the remediation cost to $2 million and we lower the municipal taxes increase that the city will receive. And so in this case, it's just to show that they don't always get their money back. If the development is smaller in scale and they have higher remediation costs, in this case, they get annual payments and they max out at that point before they are able to retrieve all of their remediation costs, which does happen sometimes. As I mentioned, there's a DC reduction option, which is for ERG applicants who are approved. It will allow for the grant amount to be applied towards their DCs that would otherwise be due after any credits are applied. So if they've already paid their DCs, we can get their approval, then we will retroactively apply their grant amount towards their DCs that they paid and give them a refund. Or if we're ahead of the curve on some things, they can enter into a deferral with finance to not pay them right away until such time as we can sort out all their eligible costs and do the audit of their expenses. And then they pay the remaining amount after that's applied. So in the example that I provided on the previous slide, I just threw in that the payable DCs on this example, if they were 500,000, that would be deducted from the $1 million they could potentially get back. And the grant amount would continue for the same number of years afterwards, just at a proportionally reduced amount. So in this case, it's reduced from 200,000 to 100,000 to take into account that we gave them a DC reduction of 500,000. The remediation loan program is the only loan program for remediation that we have. It's to assist with remediation costs that are for sites within the downtown and the West Harbourfront project areas. The loan maximum is $400,000 and is offered at 0% interest. The loan program can only be applied for in conjunction with an approved Erase Redevelopment Grant Program or Carlos Hamilton Tax Increment Grant Program. And we require that grant payments made under each of those programs first go towards paying off the loan before they start getting any of those grant payments. So this is a good program to show how we're doing and to show the success and metrics that we're having. So over 380 acres of land have been studied to date or in the process of being studied. The total assessment increase due to the ERG program is in excess of $129 million. For every $1 contributed by the city, it has generated a little over $11 in private sector construction. And overall remediation and redevelopment has been approved on approximately 210 acres of brownfield land in the city, of which 123 acres has been remediated as of 2018. Just two examples for you to show some of the results we've had. So this is 212 King William Street. They had an erase study grant as well as an erase redevelopment grant. The site was a former parking lot, warehouse, manufacturing, had various commercial uses. Quite contaminated with estimated costs to clean up the site of $4.8 million. So they've been approved. They're going to develop a 14-story building, 266 residential units, and based on that tax increase that will be realized, they'll get their remediation costs back within a period of 6 years. And another example on a slightly smaller scale is 101 Lop Street South, former grocery store, gas station site, car wash, vehicle maintenance, had remediation costs anticipated at about 1.3 million. Great building, 6-story building, 80 residential units. Their grant period will be 5 years. Now, I'm just going to touch briefly on the Hamilton Leading the Way program. This is administered within economic development, but is actually administered by my colleague, Brian Morris. So I'll pretend to know what I'm talking about. The LEAD program is a tax increment-based program that provides an economic catalyst for sustainable building and sustainable land development practices. So similar to the other tax increment grants we have, except in this case, it's really intended to be 50-50 cost sharing between the city and the applicant to help them towards their LEED certification. It provides the overall grant cannot exceed 75% of the annual tax increment that is generated by the new development. And they get it. This program is limited to a period of 5 annual payments, or until half of their costs have been recovered to achieve LEED. And again, like our other tax increment programs, this requires council. And this is just a chart to show you as an example that the program is really related to what kind of certification you're doing. And you'll get scored and financial contributions that are tied to what level of LEED that you're achieving. And I think that's it for me, and I'll hand it over to Kristen for the Hamilton Business Center.
Thanks, Val. So as Judy alluded to at the very beginning, the Hamilton Business Center is now the brand name that was associated with the Small Business Enterprise Center, which is now on the City Hall, first floor. We are a network of offices across the province of Ontario, so it's important that we recognize the small business component of that. But we're 54 offices strong across the province of Ontario, and much like our colleagues in the commercial district section, we're supporting small and medium-sized enterprise right across the city and greater region here in the Hamilton area. So next slide, please, Judy. So some of the key core services that are delivered across the Ontario network through the centers, we're going to talk a little bit about, but our role and our mandate is always the same. So economically here in Hamilton, we have some things that we prioritize and focus on, but our role and our mandate, both provincially and municipally, is to support through information and tools and resources, entrepreneurs across the community. Here in Hamilton, this has been used as a great example on a provincial level that we're conveniently co-located within the One Stop for Business here on the ground floor at City Hall. This location is key because you'll see as we talk through some of the programs, the interdependence on the other departments and how that's actually worked to the success of a number of the grants and incentives that we're delivering here in Hamilton. Next slide, Judy. Yep. So I thought it's important to understand, many of you have probably walked by and taken a peek on your way to the water station or to grab a coffee, but I thought it was important to share some of the metrics that the team has in terms of the success. So just last year alone, there was 421 new jobs that were created. And you can see that that helped create 275 new businesses in Hamilton. So again, going right across Hamilton, not specific to one area, reaching our rural and commercial sectors. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the grants and the incentives now as we kind of talk through this. Judy? Some of the core services that help us deliver and realize some of those metrics that we just discussed are primarily our consulting. So oftentimes you'll see people visiting the center or popping in. That's a time where they're meeting with our business advisors in a one-to-one consultation setting. It's free, doesn't cost anything, but it's an opportunity for them to review a business plan or help with a marketing strategy or work through information in their financials that they're not sure of. Beyond that, and now more so than ever, there's a lot of online training and seminars that we have in place. There's over 30 a month that are taking place right now. So as much as we've had to pivot our business operation, there's still a lot of traction and things that are going on. A big part, again, is our interdependence with our colleagues and our building colleagues in zoning, as well as our planning partners here in the One Stop, and how we engage our clients to understand the rules and regulations as they're starting and expanding businesses. More so than ever, the team is working to engage our partners. So we have over 40 different mentors and volunteers, professionals that support the activities that happen here. And we actually have our accountants and lawyers on the phone once a week talking with business owners through strategies and resources to help them right now through this difficult time under that access to professional banner. Next slide, Judy. One of the key initiatives that we've delivered as a network of offices across Ontario is our Summer Company Initiative. And this one is very important to us. So right now, more so than ever, many of you may know young people who have just been displaced through a summer job or are no longer in school and not sure what they're going to do with their summers. Summer Company is really an opportunity for us to work with young people to understand the viable career options that await them in entrepreneurship. And this program sees young people between the ages of 15 and 29 start and run their own summer business. Very important program. It's been around since 2001, as I've mentioned, but the impact of this program is tremendous. We provide a grant of up to $3,000 to help these young people overcome that barrier of the financial cost. And then we actually match them with mentors and coaches who guide them and help them really run and commercialize their business over the summer months. It's amazing what they can make. Last year we had 17 students. All 17 students at the end of the program said they really see entrepreneurship as a viable career option. I'm pleased to report at this point, already this year, we have 5 applications in that have been accepted and will be running this summer amidst everything else going on. So if you know young people, this is a great program to really let them roll up their sleeves, have some chance to start and run their own business and really understand the merits of entrepreneurship. On a greater level, and why we continue this program is Summer Company year after year has a great retention value, and we've seen 87.3% of our students continue their business summer after summer, and more than 78% of those students after a 5-year term continue to run and have economic impact in our community. So they catch that entrepreneurial bug, they're out in our community, and we have many success stories about how students are doing that. The ER Monaco business plan competition is also an opportunity where Drew Gates is going into the classrooms, and right now she's been live online talking with high school students about entrepreneurship and how we can support them through that. Here they actually prepare a comprehensive business plan, and then we celebrate through an awards competition this year that we hope will be held in October during Small Business Week. Next slide, Judy. The Starter Company Plus program is a program that continues to be a mainstay with our ministry partners, and this program has tremendous impact right now, more so than ever. This is a training, a mentorship, and a micro grant program of up to $5,000 to help businesses as they're starting or growing less than 1 year in operation in our community. This program's been going for 5 years. This past year, the team was actually able to do 20, it says 26 here, but we actually did 27. We squeaked one extra one out in March and lent out or granted out $5,000 to each of those businesses. Very important that we understand that this program was due to end on March 31st, and the team, through their success and ability to quickly pivot operations, instead of losing this grant capital, was actually able to work with 14 businesses who, amidst everything else that's going on, is going through mentoring and training, and they've started and commercialized their businesses over the past month, creating 21 new jobs. So this program, as we continue going forward, will continue to have huge impact on our community. So if you know a new entrepreneur or somebody who's been operating less than a year, this might be a really good program that can help them get that training, coaching, mentorship, and that grant for their business to help them continue to be successful. Next slide, please. The last program I want to talk a little bit about is our Digital Main Street. And this is a program where we partnered with the Ontario Business Improvement Association, along with our local Hamilton Chamber of Commerce. And over the past year, we've actually been able to hire staff to go out of City Hall, meet with businesses and talk with them about their digital strategy and how to be successful. Now more so than ever, I think we can all realize the importance of that digital economy and how we need to be online and have a social presence and expand our marketing. Those businesses that participated in this program, totaling more than 580 over the past year, actually received grants of up to $2,500 to go ahead and implement a number of different strategies to help them be successful. And many of them have communicated back with the team to say that what better program was there than to prepare them for this right now, what they're dealing with. Now they have digital training and strategies and tools and resources in place, but also have a network of people that they can turn to. So we still continue this program today. We still have our team working remotely, consulting with businesses, helping them grow and expand their digital presence. I should also note that out of the 248 municipalities across Ontario, Hamilton was the most successful in achieving grants under this program for our business community outside of the GTA. Next slide, please. So in terms of some of the consulting things, and in the sake of time, I'm not going to read through this. There's a number of different ways that this team can continue to help. We are still here kind of on the front lines, answering calls and seeing a great volume of people looking for help through their business plan, looking for help to answer questions, help with their financials and understanding rules and regulations, and also looking to understand and navigate federally, provincially, and municipally, what are the programs and incentives that they can leverage. So that would be a great referral for this team if you wanted to pass them on or pass along our phone number, connect us with them through our social channels where we can continue to support business during this time. Next slide. And here are those social channels that I just mentioned, where we're doing lots of live chats, profiling in some of these programs that we've talked about, and keeping the businesses engaged. And next slide. I'll pass it back to you, Judy.
And through our group. I think Sylvia had some questions coming in. I know there's not a lot of time, but they flashed at my screen since, so Sylvia, did you want to read through them?
So I'm just going to jump in, but looking at the time, it looks like we're at 1 o'clock. We do have some great questions that came in here from it looks like Jen, Margaret, and Paul. So I think just for the sake of time, I think we're going to have the team respond to them, if that's okay.
Okay.
I know that people might have other meetings they have to get to. Thank you so much for sending your questions in. Thank you to the presenters, Judy, Phil, Lisa, Carlo, and Kristen. You guys did a fantastic job. And thank you to our audience. You guys were really great at tuning in and keeping your mics muted. So that's really appreciated. I know I learned a lot. Thanks a lot for putting everything together, and stay tuned for our future virtual PED Lunch and Learns. Until next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Sylvia. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Hi, guys.
If anyone, I don't know if anyone stayed behind to get an answer to the question, but we could answer.
I'm here, Phil. I want my answer.
Okay. Yeah, we have. Is Paul in here?
I saw her name and I thought she's not going anywhere till she gets an answer.
I know,
Oh,
and Jen.
like that, Phil.
So yours was the renoviction one, right?
Yeah, for both residential and commercial, I was thinking.
Okay, so I'll do my best. So we did have a motion from council last year in July, raising some concerns about whether our incentives were being provided to landlords and building owners who were potentially forcing out tenants. as part of the renovation of these buildings, particularly along Barton and King Street as really two main streets that were of focus. We just at the outset, we're not aware that that's happened, that our incentives have been used in that way, but it was nonetheless a good issue to address ahead of time. But we looked at it, we worked with Housing Services, and we brought back amendments to our programs back in, I think it was October last year with a report. And we did make changes. So just quickly for you, we told council that we're going to start requiring applicants to tell us right at the outset if any of the units are occupied at the time they apply to us. When we know that information, we developed a comprehensive education package with Housing Services that is then mailed out to those tenants in those units to make them aware of their legal rights. Some of the issues we came across were that people just didn't know they had the right to not take a buyout from their unit, for example, because landlords weren't really doing anything illegal. They were doing everything kind of by the book, if you will. It just wasn't maybe the nicest thing in the world. So we really felt there was a gap in terms of people being aware of their rights.
Pilot project.
And so we'll mail out those packages now. We also have new conditions on approvals that say you can't raise the rent or apply to the landlord tenant board to raise someone's rent above guideline increase that the province establishes for any units that were subject to city funding as part of their renovation, or else we cancel the grant and take the money back. And I think, and we started asking the landlord tenant board to provide us quarterly request information so we can see exactly which buildings and which sites are making requests to the LTB to increase rents, so that we now have a way of identifying any grant applicants who are doing that so that we can address that. It's part of the enforcement of the new conditions. And then we're also providing written notices to each of the occupied units about the program that their landlord or building owner has applied to us and what their intention is, so that they know what's going on. So that was what we did on that. We said it was going to be for a 1-year period that we would monitor to see how it's going, because it's not perfect. There are limitations to what we can do, particularly if they've done something with tenants prior to coming to us for a grant. We don't know retroactively what has happened, but we can start to enforce things once they have applied. On the commercial side, that wasn't the focus of the motion. It is something that has come up a few times now about losing potential commercial tenants to increases in rent. So James Street is a good example. Some of the artists, for example, who maybe are losing out on those spaces. It is something that's been highlighted for our CIP review to see if there's any programs we can maybe look at to, particularly on the artist front, the kind of those people who are really providing the character to James Street and some of these other streets. But it's, that's kind of the extent of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Phil,
Yes.
could I ask that you would you mind writing that out to Jen's question so that we can share it? I have an inquiry here asking if we can share the questions and the responses with leaders so that they can distribute it.
Sure. Okay. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, just nice and short.
I did answer Margaret Fazio's question, so I typed it to her. Paul is on, and do you want to read out your question, Paul? It's about heritage loans and programs. Or do you want me to read it? Hi, Paul. I can read it just in case. He shows online, but I'll just read it to everyone. If a heritage property owner applies for a city loan, can they also apply for other loans or grants from provincial or federal sources at the same time? So Carlo, this is for you.
I guess. So one of the reasons I kind of kicked out there was because I went and got all the program descriptions yesterday. So when it comes to our community heritage loan, according to the program description, the only term that pays attention to that question is it's written that loan amounts may be reduced if the applicant is participating in other government supported programs. So I guess the answer is yes, they could. If they were applying for our particular program, yes, they could apply for other programs, whatever they may be. But the impact that would have on their city loan amount, I guess, would have to be looked at given the circumstances. How much were they getting? Where was it coming from? What were they planning on using the other funding for? They could also apply for one of our other grant programs. Like, let's say that they were located within a BIA. They could apply for the BIA CPIG grant program. However, any items to be funded from that program could not be heritage items. They would have to be non-heritage items from the BIA CPIG program. Only, and then the flip of that, of course, is that only heritage items can be used from the heritage programs. So I guess it kind of depends. Is the answer? It would depend on what they were applying for and what other programs they were looking to get funding for. And I guess when we looked at the loan application, we would take that all into consideration. I mean, maybe we would reduce how much we would be giving to them, given how much they were getting from other sources.
Okay. Paul has no mic, he told us. So thank you for that question. And Carlo will write it up. You just said.
I'm doing it. You're doing it. You're doing it.
Remember, this is all recorded, though, right?
That's true. So
I'm just doing what I'm told.
I think that's it for the questions. So did you see any more, Sylvia? I think that's it, right?
I think that's it.
Well, there's someone still there.
Suman. And so I think, thank you, everybody. I have a hop off. I'm 10 minutes late for a marketing meeting. So thank you. You guys can go have lunch since you guys were talking during lunch.
Aw, thank you guys. You guys did amazing.
Okay.
Julia.
Hey, Julia.
It's Julia. Yay.
Julia's lurking in the background there.
She was hiding. I never saw her.
She misses us.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Let us have feedback if it was useful. Okay. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Bye.
Hi, everybody.